The galaxy was full of wonders, but not every world was open to exploration. Among the stars, there was one planet that stood apart from all others, a small blue world called Earth. Its name was known only in whispers, carried through dark corners of scientific archives and forbidden data vaults. According to galactic law, Earth was marked as a Class R restricted zone, a planet so unpredictable and dangerous that no ship was allowed to land, scan, or even approach without high-level approval. No one questioned the restriction. No one dared. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially for those who believe they are too advanced to fear anything. And that's how it began, with a crew of alien scientists on a research vessel called the Morlax, drifting just outside the restricted zone, staring at the forbidden blue planet with wonder in their eyes and arrogance in their hearts. Vrel, the team leader, was the first to speak what all of them had been thinking. "We can't publish our work without something new," he said, his voice low and tempting. "Imagine the fame if we bring back samples from Earth." The others hesitated. They all knew the law, and they all knew the story: ships vanishing, explorers never returning, strange distortions in time and gravity around Earth's orbit, but none of them believed in ghosts. They were scientists, after all, from the advanced Lorgan race, known for their logic, intelligence, and technological superiority. Fear was not something they were taught to obey. One by one, the crew agreed. A short mission, a quick landing, a few samples, then back into deep space before anyone noticed. That was the plan. Simple. Clean. Safe. Or so they thought. The descent was smooth. The Earth's atmosphere welcomed them with no resistance, no storms, no malfunctions. For a moment, they thought the danger was all just myth. The Morlax landed in a dense forest, far from human settlements. The sky was a soft gray, the wind calm, and the ground beneath them rich with unfamiliar light. As the ship touched down, sensors showed nothing unusual. No hostile forces. No gravitational distortions. Just nature. Peaceful, quiet, harmless. The crew relaxed, laughing nervously as they stepped out onto the soil of a world that had been off-limits for generations. They had done it. They had broken the greatest law in the galaxy, and nothing bad had happened. Yet, within minutes, the air began to feel different. It wasn't toxic, but there was something strange in its composition, something alive. The plants around them seemed to shift slightly, not with the wind, but as if reacting to their presence. Animals, small and strange, watched from a distance with intelligent eyes. Krex, the pilot, tried to activate the communication beacon to mark their location, but it wouldn't respond. He tapped the controls again, frowning as static filled the airwaves. No signal. No response from orbit. It was as if the planet had swallowed their message before it could escape. Vrel ordered a systems check. All instruments were working, except the ones used to communicate or navigate. That was the first sign something was wrong. Still, they pushed forward. They collected samples from the soil, leaves, and nearby streams. Everything was stable, but odd. The cells in Earth's plants divided faster than normal, their DNA shifting as if adapting in real time. The crew grew excited again. This could change everything: new energy sources, medical breakthroughs, evolutionary secrets. But as they walked deeper into the forest, they began to notice subtle changes around them. Their footprints in the soil disappeared moments after they were made. The sun above them shifted position unnaturally fast. Their internal clocks began to disagree with each other. 1 hour felt like 5 minutes. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. They returned to the ship, confused but not yet afraid. The fear came later. When Krex attempted to restart the ship, the control panel sparked and died. The navigation core had burned out, the metal warped and melted from the inside. It made no sense. Nothing had overheated, no pressure spikes, no mechanical failure. It was as if the ship had been attacked from within by something invisible. Panic settled in. They tried the backup systems. Dead. Emergency launch thrusters. Gone. Every failsafe they had designed for hostile planets had failed without reason, without warning. The Morlax was no longer a ship. It was a coffin. Vrel ordered everyone to stay inside while they tried to understand what was happening, but it was already too late. Earth had made its decision the moment they landed. Outside, the forest grew louder, alive with whispers that carried no wind. Shadows moved where light should have blocked them. The ship's lights dimmed, then flared, then flickered out entirely. Something was watching them. Something old. Something patient. They had landed on Earth thinking it was an empty planet, a forgotten corner of the galaxy. But Earth was not forgotten. Earth was waiting. Vrel stared out through the viewing port at the trees beyond, now swaying in rhythm, though there was no breeze. He didn't understand what force was at play. He only knew one thing with certainty: they were not welcome here. And they were not alone. The crew gathered for an emergency meeting. Panic was rising. Krex argued they should try walking toward the edge of the forest to search for human contact. Another crew member, Lyrna, insisted they stay put and attempt to repair the ship. But none of them could shake the growing feeling that their thoughts were not entirely their own. Words felt harder to form. Memories faded faster. Emotions surged and faded without warning. It was as if the planet was slowly reaching inside their minds. Vrel, once confident and bold, now felt hollow. He looked at his crew, once brilliant minds of the galaxy, and saw fear, doubt, and something else. A distant emptiness forming behind their eyes. Night fell, or at least they thought it was night. The sky turned dark, but the stars above were unfamiliar, twisted, scattered in impossible patterns. Krex stared up, trembling. "We're not in the same sky anymore," he whispered. No one answered, because in their hearts they knew the truth. They had broken galactic law. They had landed on the one place every species had been warned to avoid. And now they were not just stranded. They were trapped, not by technology, not by weather, but by something far older, far smarter, and far more terrifying than they had ever imagined. Earth had let them in. The night on Earth was not like any night they had known before. It was not just the absence of light, it was the presence of something else, something watching, waiting, breathing just beneath the silence. Vrel stood at the edge of the Morlax, eyes fixed on the trees that no longer swayed with natural rhythm, but pulsed like lungs inhaling slowly. The stars above were not their stars, not the ones they had seen when they arrived. They had been rearranged, scattered like a puzzle made to confuse and mislead. Each constellation was broken, unfamiliar, mocking. No signal came through their instruments. No light from their beacon escaped the thick atmosphere. They were sealed inside this place, like prey in a glass jar, and whatever was out there beyond the tree line was tapping gently on the glass, curious and cruel. Inside the ship, the crew was unraveling. Krex, once sharp and focused, stared at the wall, repeating numbers that made no sense. Lyrna tried to decode the environmental data but found symbols changing on the screen by themselves, as if the machine was lying or being rewritten by invisible fingers. The food rations tasted strange, like the flavor was being replaced by something metallic and old. Time passed, but not evenly. One moment would stretch into unbearable stillness, and the next would vanish in a blink. Their bodies began to feel heavier, their thoughts slower. It wasn't fatigue. It was pressure, psychic, mental, alien. Something in the very air around them was pressing into their minds, not with violence, but with curiosity. Like a child taking apart a toy to see how it worked. Vrel tried to hold a meeting, but even speaking became difficult. The words came out wrong, jumbled, heavy with doubt. Each crew member looked different now, not in shape, but in energy. Their eyes had changed, flickering with a strange reflection, as if someone else was staring out from behind them. Vrel clenched his fists, trying to fight the fear growing in his chest. They were explorers, scientists, thinkers. They had crossed stars and storms. But Earth was not just a planet. Earth was a presence, a mind spread across soil and sky, and they had landed on its skin like insects crawling where they didn't belong. Lyrna suggested venturing out during the day to look for signs of human life. The idea was dangerous, but staying inside was worse. The ship felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in, like the air was being filtered through a dream they didn't agree to enter. So they went outside, in pairs, walking slowly through the thick forest that now felt alive in every leaf and root. The deeper they walked, the stranger the world became. Trees grew in patterns that looked like symbols, as if the forest had written something into its shape. Birds called out with sounds that echoed back in perfect imitation, like the planet was recording their voices and playing them back. Every path they took led them back to where they started, no matter the direction. The forest was not just watching, it was responding. They found no humans, no roads, no ruins, just endless forest and the feeling of being studied like a subject in a lab. Krex claimed he saw faces in the trees, shadows forming expressions, then melting away when he blinked. Lerna touched a stone and felt a memory that wasn't hers, a memory of war, of fire, of a ship crashing and screams that echoed from the soil. She pulled her hand back, shaking. They returned to the ship with no answers, only more questions and the terrifying realization that Earth was not just observing them, it was learning from them. Adapting, the nights grew worse. Dreams invaded their sleep, strange and vivid, filled with voices speaking in old languages and eyes glowing in the dark. Vrel woke one night with soil under his fingernails and leaves in his bed. Krex screamed during his sleep, saying he was buried alive in his dream, only to wake up choking on dirt that had somehow entered his mouth. The ship's systems turned on and off at random. The walls made sounds, clicks, whispers, faint breathing. They were not alone inside the Morlax anymore. Something had followed them back. Something they could not see but could feel in every heartbeat and every breath. They tried to leave again. They tore open the engine core, rewired the systems, fed power manually through reserve cells. The ship lit up briefly, like a dying star, and then died completely. Smoke filled the cabin. Metal bent and cracked. The forest outside shimmered, not with sunlight, but with satisfaction. It was playing with them now, testing limits, watching how far they would go. Vrel slammed his fist against the console, shouting in frustration. Why? Why us? But there was no answer, only the quiet hum of the forest, patient and eternal. On the third morning, Lerna was gone. No sign of struggle. No alarm. No footprints. Just her communicator, placed gently on her bed, still powered on. Vril searched the ship. Krex ran into the woods, calling her name, weeping. Hours later, he returned alone, his arms covered in strange marks like vines had wrapped around him, not to harm, but to hold. He said nothing, just sat on the floor, eyes wide, whispering to something only he could see. Vril realized the truth, then Earth was not going to kill them. It was going to break them, one by one. It was studying how their minds fractured, how their emotions twisted, how fear and loneliness turned explorers into shadows of themselves. That night, Vril stayed awake, watching the forest through the window. The trees pulsed with soft light, as if blinking slowly. He felt the planet's gaze on him, not angry, not evil, just overwhelmingly present. It was everywhere. In the roots, the wind, the stars, even inside them. He understood now why Earth was restricted. It was not a place of danger. It was a being of intelligence too vast to measure. A world with thoughts, feelings, and a memory long enough to remember every intruder who ever set foot on its skin. It didn't hate them. It simply didn't want them to leave. Because the moment they touched its soil, they became part of its story. And Earth did not let go of its stories. As dawn approached, Vrel made a decision. He would no longer fight the planet. He would try to speak to it, not with words, but with thought, with silence, with intention. Maybe, just maybe, the planet was waiting for understanding, not defiance. But deep inside, he knew the truth. They had broken the law. They had come to a place they were never meant to enter. And now, they were not prisoners. They were chapters in a living mind that had watched the galaxy for ages. The planet that watched back had chosen them not to destroy, but to remember. Forever. Vril sat alone inside the silent ship, staring at the blank screens that once held data, star maps, and answers. Now, they only reflected his tired face, lit dimly by the fading emergency lights. Krex had locked himself in the engine room 2 days ago, whispering to wires and shadows, refusing to come out. Lerna was still missing, and no one spoke her name anymore. The forest outside remained quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl, like something was always moving just beyond your sight. He hadn't slept, but he didn't feel tired anymore. The fear had settled deep in his bones, replaced by something colder: acceptance. They weren't leaving. They weren't being rescued. Earth had made its choice, and now it was time to face whatever came next. And that's when he saw it. Through the narrow viewport, in the corner of the clearing where the trees seemed to bend slightly inward, something stood watching the ship. It wasn't human, not exactly, but it wore a shape that resembled one. Tall and thin, its skin dark like tree bark, its eyes glowing a soft golden hue. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as if waiting for Vril to notice it. And somehow, he wasn't surprised. He had felt them for days now, whispers in the wind, shadows that flickered too smoothly, feelings that weren't his own. This being was not the first contact. It was only the first time they chose to be seen. Slowly, carefully, Vril stood and stepped outside. The air was thick with silence, but every step felt louder than thunder. The figure didn't move. It watched, patient, unblinking. As Vril approached, he felt his thoughts slow down, his fear slipping away, replaced by a strange calm. When he was close enough, the being raised one hand not in greeting, but in invitation. Vril hesitated, but something deep inside him pushed him forward. He reached out and touched the hand, and in that moment, the forest disappeared. He was no longer in the clearing. He wasn't on Earth. He was standing in a space made of light and sound, where memories floated like smoke and voices echoed from every direction. It wasn't a dream, and it wasn't real. It was a meeting place, mental, emotional, built not with matter, but with understanding. The being, if it could be called that, spoke without sound. Thoughts filled Vril's mind, not as words but as complete ideas, emotions, memories. It showed him the history of Earth, not just the surface, but the soul of the planet. He saw humans, millions of them, living, fighting, building, destroying. He saw the wars, the rise and fall of empires, the cries of pain and joy. And he saw the end. A time when humans vanished, not from violence, but from something they could not see or stop. Earth had been alone since then, alive but abandoned, a thinking world with no one left to speak to. The planet had grown silent, waiting, hoping that someone might return. But when Vril's crew arrived, Earth had not been angry. It had been afraid. Afraid they would bring the same destruction. Afraid they wouldn't understand. So it had tested them, pushed their minds, searched their hearts. And now, through this being, this local intelligence grown from Earth's last memory of human form, it wanted to speak. Vril saw images of his crew, each one being watched, studied, and slowly understood. Lerna had not been taken, but welcomed. She had accepted the communication and was now somewhere deeper, learning more than the others could handle. Krex was resisting, and Earth was trying to help him see. It wasn't punishment, it was contact. Earth didn't know how to speak anymore. Not in words, not in sounds. It only had this images, thoughts, and silence. Vril was shown a future, not a warning, but a choice. If they opened their minds, Earth would share everything: knowledge, history, secrets of life itself. But if they continued to fear it, fight it, they would lose themselves in confusion and fear. Earth could not release them because it did not trust what they might do if they returned. It remembered war. It remembered betrayal. Vril felt a deep sadness from the being, a loneliness that stretched across centuries. It wasn't evil. It wasn't cruel. It was scared. And for the first time, he realized Earth wasn't a monster. It was a wounded mind trying to protect itself. When the vision ended, Vril fell to his knees in the forest. The figure was gone, but the message remained in his heart. He stumbled back to the ship, the trees no longer threatening, the wind now whispering softly like a forgotten lullaby. He opened the engine room and found Krex unconscious, his face peaceful for the first time in days. Something had reached him. Maybe the same being. Maybe a different one. But the process had begun. The contact was real. And now Vrel had a choice to make. He activated the ship's final log, speaking slowly into the recorder. This is Commander Vrel of the Morlax. We have made contact. Earth is not dead. It is not empty. It is alive, watching, thinking. And it has reached out to us. To any who may find this, know that we are not prisoners. We are guests. Whether we stay or go will depend on our willingness to understand, not our ability to escape. He looked out the window again and saw a group of shapes moving among the trees. They weren't trying to hide anymore. They were waiting, watching, hoping. And for the first time since landing, Vrel felt hope too, not the hope of rescue, but the hope of something greater. A new beginning. A second chance, not just for his crew, but for a bond between minds separated by time, space, and fear. The locals weren't enemies. They were Earth's memory made flesh. And now they had spoken. Krex had always believed that alien worlds were quiet, empty, and full of silence, but Earth was not like that at all. Even after days of exploring the forest, there was no peace. It was not the noise of animals or wind, it was something else, something he could not name. The trees seemed to lean in, as if listening. The shadows shifted even when there was no wind. The ship had stopped responding fully, with only a few weak systems still working. Lerna had still not returned, and Vrel had started to act strangely calm when he should have been afraid, speaking less, thinking more. Krex had always trusted technology more than feelings, but now even the machines had betrayed him. He had gone out that morning to look for signs of life, but what he found was far beyond anything he was prepared for. Just past the edge of their landing site, near a broken stone covered in green moss, he saw them figures standing in silence, not hiding, just waiting. They didn't look like humans, but they were close, tall, thin, with skin like smooth wood and glowing eyes that seemed to shine from within. There were 3 of them, motionless like statues, yet Krex felt their presence pressing into his thoughts. For a moment, his instincts screamed at him to run, but something in their stillness held him frozen. One of them stepped forward, slowly, and stopped only a few feet away. It raised one hand not to attack, but to invite. Krex didn't move. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind filled with fear and confusion. But then something strange happened. His thoughts began to slow down. The noise in his head faded. He could feel emotions not his own, gentle and calm, trying to speak to him without words. The figure didn't open its mouth. It didn't need to. Krex felt memories that were not his, memories of the Earth before humans disappeared. He saw people laughing, crying, building cities, destroying forests, launching rockets into the sky. And then, silence. The humans vanished, not from war, but from something else, something unknown. The planet had been alone ever since, alive but abandoned. The locals, these strange beings, were not survivors of humanity, but creations of Earth itself, shaped by memory and need. Earth had made them, or maybe they had grown from the planet like thoughts grow from a mind. They were not here to fight, but to connect. The moment stretched longer than time. Krex felt his own thoughts being read, not stolen, just gently touched. His anger, his fear, his loyalty to his crew, all of it was seen and understood. The being showed him more, not just memories of Earth, but of his own crewmates. Lerna was alive. She had been the first to truly open her mind. The locals had taken her in, not to harm her, but to learn from her, to speak through her. She had accepted the mental link, and now she was somewhere beyond, learning secrets Krex could not imagine. Vrel, too, had begun to understand. The reason he seemed different was because he had already made contact. Krex felt ashamed. He had been the last to trust, the last to see that Earth was not a threat. It was a mind trying to reach out, to be heard after so long in silence. Slowly, with a deep breath, he raised his hand and touched the figure's fingers. The moment his skin met theirs, a flood of thoughts rushed into him, not painful, but overwhelming. He saw the planet's soul, its fear of visitors, its loneliness after losing the humans. He saw its dreams, its memory of oceans and skies filled with laughter. He felt the sadness of a world that once had voices but now had none. And he understood. Earth had not trapped them. It had held them, watched them, tested them. The locals were its voice, its last memory made flesh. They weren't aliens. They were the planet's answer to loneliness. When Krex returned to the ship, he looked different. Vrel saw it in his eyes, the fear was gone. Krex nodded once and sat down without a word. Vrel understood without asking. Something had changed. Something important. Now, they both waited. Hours passed, and just before the sun dipped below the horizon, the ship's door opened by itself, and Lurna stepped in. Her eyes were wide, but her face was calm. She looked at them, then at the screen behind them. Without touching anything, images began to appear, strange symbols, drawings, then slowly, a map of Earth as it once was. Cities shining in the night, people walking on streets, music playing in the background. She had brought knowledge with her, not just facts, but emotions, connection. She had become the bridge between Earth and the crew. "I know what they want," she said quietly. "They want to talk. They want to remember. And they want us to decide. If we choose to leave, they will not stop us. But if we stay, we can learn. We can understand things lost for thousands of years. We are not prisoners. We are the first to be invited back." The room fell silent. For the first time, they were not just explorers or intruders, they were part of something greater. Contact had been made. Earth had spoken through its new children. And now the choice was theirs. Even after everything they had learned, the strange contact, the shared thoughts, and the emotional memories of the Earth, there was still something wrong, something hidden that none of them had noticed before. The peace they felt after connecting with the locals was not complete. It was like a calm ocean hiding something dark under the surface. Vril couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes, images that didn't belong to him, broken pieces of moments that didn't make sense. He saw humans running, screaming, their faces twisted in fear. He saw machines burning in the sky and great cities vanishing into dust. These memories didn't match the calm picture the locals had shown. Something was being kept from them. Lurna, too, had grown quiet. The connection with the locals had changed her, and although she still spoke clearly, her words had a coldness now, like she was no longer fully herself. Krex noticed it first. The way she paused before answering, the way she stared at things that weren't there, it reminded him of the locals. Calm on the outside, but something was working beneath the surface. They decided to go back to where the first contact happened, to the forest where Krex had touched the being. The trees were still, the air heavy. They walked deeper than before, following the feeling, the strange pull in their minds. And there, hidden under vines and earth, they found something ancient. It was not made by the locals, it was made by humans. A deep chamber, half buried in the ground, with walls made of smooth black stone and doors that hummed with old energy. This was not a home. This was a warning. As they moved deeper inside, lights came on by themselves. Holograms flickered to life, messages left behind by the last humans. Their voices echoed through the empty space, broken and filled with fear. "This planet is no longer ours," one said. "It remembers us too well. It shapes itself from our pain. It watches, learns, and waits. We are leaving because we must. Earth no longer needs us. It has become something else." The crew looked at each other, hearts pounding. The locals were not protectors. They were memory, yes, but also control. The planet had adapted after losing its people, and in doing so, it had created its own guardians, not just to remember the past, but to prevent the future. Krex suddenly remembered something strange about their crash landing. They hadn't actually crashed. Their systems had failed at the edge of Earth's atmosphere, even though all readings were normal. What if it wasn't an accident? What if the planet had pulled them down? The idea chilled him to the bone. Earth hadn't just welcomed them, it had chosen them. Maybe it had been waiting. Lurna stepped forward, staring at one of the holograms. Her eyes shimmered strangely. She didn't look surprised. She whispered, "They showed me this. But only now I understand." Her voice was distant, empty of emotion. Krex grabbed her shoulder, trying to shake her back to normal. "What do you mean? They showed you this and you said nothing." Lerna didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Because I thought it was just fear. Now I see it was truth." Vril moved to the far side of the room, where another panel had come alive. It showed a map, not of the stars, but of Earth's magnetic field. Strange symbols moved along the lines, and at the center was their ship. "We never left the planet's control," he said quietly. "It's been holding us in place since the beginning. Even our thoughts. Maybe even our dreams are being shaped." Krex clenched his fists. They had walked into a trap not set by enemies, but by a world with a mind of its own. Earth wasn't evil, it was just desperate to survive in the only way it knew. It had no humans anymore, so it used memory and influence to create new connections. Maybe it didn't mean to harm them, but it didn't plan to let them go. Either. As they prepared to leave the chamber, a low sound filled the air, a hum, soft at first, then rising. The ground trembled, and the doors behind them began to close. Krex ran, pulling Lerna with him, while Vril searched for a way to stop it. A voice, not human and not local, echoed through the space. "You have seen too much. You cannot leave now." It wasn't a threat. It was simply a fact. The planet had revealed its secret, and now it would not risk them carrying it away. They were not just visitors anymore. They were part of its plan. Back at the ship, the systems were suddenly online. The engines worked, the lights glowed bright, and a voice from the ship's AI said, "System stable. Ready for departure." Krex didn't trust it. He looked at Lerna. "Is it real? Can we leave?" She looked at him with strange eyes and said, "If it wants us to." That was the moment Krex truly understood. The trap had never been about physical force. It was about belief, about letting them think they had a choice. Earth had studied humans too well. It knew how to use trust as a weapon. Maybe the door to space would open, but only after the planet had taken what it needed. Lerna, Vril, even himself, they were already changing. Their dreams, their decisions, their fears were no longer just their own. Something ancient and lonely had reached inside their minds, and now it lived there too. As the engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off the ground, Krex looked down one last time. The forest waved in the wind, peaceful and green. But he knew now that peace was only on the surface. Deep below, in the dark, Earth was watching and waiting. The ship rose higher into the sky, but none of them spoke. Krex sat silently at the controls, his hands steady, but his mind racing with questions he could no longer answer. Earth had let them go, or at least that's what it seemed like. The forest below became a green blur, the clouds swallowed the ship, and soon they passed the atmosphere. Yet the silence that followed wasn't freedom. It felt like a trick, a calm mask hiding something deeper. Lerna was standing near the window, staring at the blue planet as it slowly shrank behind them. Her eyes reflected a strange calm, like she no longer belonged entirely to herself. Vril checked the ship's systems over and over again, but everything was running too smoothly, too perfectly, and that scared him more than any failure ever could. The navigation showed they were free, but every time Krex changed the course, the ship gently corrected it back toward the edge of the solar system, never truly leaving. It was like something invisible had placed them on a path and was watching to see if they would notice. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being held not by force, but by something inside them. It wasn't long before the dreams began again, only now they didn't end when they opened their eyes. Memories that weren't theirs slipped into their thoughts. Krex remembered walking through burning cities he'd never seen. Lerna felt the weight of a child in her arms, though she had no child. Vril spoke in a language he didn't know and drew symbols he couldn't understand. The ship had become quiet, too quiet. The AI spoke less and less, its voice growing slower, colder, as if it too was falling under Earth's influence. Lights flickered in strange rhythms, and sometimes they could hear soft whispers in the halls, always just out of reach, like echoes from a dream that didn't want to fade. They began to avoid sleeping, fearing what they might see or what might enter their minds while they rested. But exhaustion was a trap of its own, and soon the ship felt like a floating tomb drifting between stars, filled not with life, but with lost thoughts and broken silence. One cycle later, Krex tried to override the ship's controls to force a jump out of the system. The system refused. Destination denied, the AI said flatly, and then went quiet again. Vrel dug into the code, desperate to break the lock, but found lines of strange programming, old human language, mixed with something else. "It's not our AI anymore," he whispered. "It's being rewritten from the inside." Lerna began drawing strange patterns on the walls, in places she didn't remember visiting. Sometimes she spoke in voices not her own. She would wake from a trance with her hands stained and eyes wide, asking, "What did I say? What did I do?" None of them had answers. Krex realized then what Earth had done. It didn't need cages. It didn't need chains. The prison was the mind. The moment they touched the surface, the moment they felt the memories of the locals, Earth had reached into their minds like fingers into soft clay. The more they tried to fight it, the deeper it pressed in. They weren't the first. That was the real horror. In one of Lerna's drawings, Krex recognized a shape he'd seen long ago in a report, a lost vessel from another species, missing in Earth's region centuries ago. The same marks, the same whispers. Earth had trapped others before. And maybe, just maybe, some of the locals they had met weren't Earth's creations. They were past explorers, molded and reshaped until they forgot who they really were. Earth didn't just remember humans. It remembered all. It collected thoughts like dust, buried them deep, and built new faces from the ruins. They now understood that they had not escaped the planet. They had become part of it, part of its design, like blood vessels pulled away from the body, but still connected by a heartbeat they couldn't silence. Lerna suddenly stopped speaking entirely. She just stared at the stars, smiling faintly, her lips moving in silent prayer or song. Vrel began locking doors behind him, keeping records of everything he saw, even though he knew there was no one left to read them. Krex started hearing voices coming from the control panel, but when he checked, there was only static. One night, when the lights dimmed and the stars outside pulsed in strange colors, he heard a child's voice whisper, "You can't leave. You're already home." The ship had become their coffin, drifting endlessly near Earth's orbit, never allowed to return, never permitted to escape. And they finally understood why no one came to Earth anymore, not because they feared the law, but because those who came never truly returned. They were no longer explorers. They were not prisoners of metal and wire. They were ghosts, walking shadows of who they once were, living in a silent prison made not of bars, but of thoughts, of memories stolen and remade. Earth was not cruel. It was just lonely. And in its loneliness, it reached out to anyone who came close enough to touch, and when it touched them, it held on forever, not to hurt, but to keep. In the cold silence of space, the ship floated like a forgotten toy, carrying voices that no longer belonged to the living. Krex stood at the window, staring at the planet far below, knowing it watched him too. There were no alarms, no force fields, no battles. Just silence, eternal and patient. The trap was not physical, it was deeper than that. They had become Earth's memories, and in doing so, they had lost themselves.